Sea of Stars has been a hotly anticipated JRPG and is available to play on both Game Pass and PlayStation Plus Extras games catalogue as of the making of this video. We're taking a look on Xbox Series S. This review will be spoiler free and we cover a new game every single week, so if you end up enjoying the video, do consider subscribing. Now, let's go on an adventure and let you know if Sea of Stars is worth your time. I'm conflicted on Sea of Stars, because whilst I can understand and even appreciate the decisions made to craft this gameplay experience, it just wasn't gripping me. Bear with me whilst I deconstruct this, because this game is by no means bad. Let's start with combat, because this is usually my breaking point with JRPGs. The toolbox here is limited, but there are a few extra tweaks to keep the combat engaging, and I really like them. The first thing you'll notice is that you have the choice of the order in which everyone attacks. You're not confined to a predetermined order or the baton pass. You have ultimate control over your party, and I really like this change. It allows you to adapt to fit combos, squeeze in some healing, and prioritise enemy weaknesses. Enemy attacks are counted down with these little stopwatches, and certain magical attacks will require you to counter with certain attacks of your own in order to weaken their power. Hit all of the weaknesses and you just cancel the enemy attacks. It's a great puzzle element to combat that replaces the guesswork of weaknesses with creative thinking. Instead of having to randomly use attacks to figure out an enemy weakness, you're given them from the get-go, and then the puzzle is figuring out how you execute those attacks to break the enemy. Hitting an enemy with a standard melee attack knocks out a bit of magic, which imbues your next standard attack with a magic bonus. This element is simple, but adds an extra layer of depth to the weakness puzzles. There's also the timing system. When you attack an enemy, or they attack you, you can press a button at the right moment to deal bonus damage or block incoming damage. Again, I like this system because it rewards you for being engaged within the battle. This also extends to abilities. Hit the button at the right time when someone is healing and you get a little bit extra HP. Random encounters aren't present, and battles dynamically take place in the world map with no loading screens. This is like my JRPG dream come true. There are some combat problems though. That limited toolbox does come back to hurt the game because battles quickly became repetitive for me. This isn't helped by the battle music, which we'll get onto later, but at a mechanical level, once I got past the fun nature of the puzzles, combat itself fell very flat. Limited toolboxes can be a good thing if they're used to solve multiple problems, but the toolbox here is solving the same-ish problems in slightly different ways. It doesn't quite get there. Your visual cue for timing attacks is also an equipable relic. There is no limit on these, but timing is such a large part of the combat system that not having the visual feedback be there as a standard feels really weird. Timing blocks and attacks also feels a bit awkward. You have to hit the button just before you think you need to, if that makes sense. This is something that will get better as you learn the game, but it never felt quite right for me. Exploration manages to work a little better with a limited toolbox. Areas are small and mostly linear, but this works for me as there are no waypoints. You have to figure out where you're going next yourself. Areas are well designed to push you in the right direction with a few optional extras. The smaller areas and no random encounters also work to remove the worst part of JRPGs: grinding. You'll be suitably powerful as you work your way through the game, which is how it should be. As with a lot of JRPGs, the opening, in terms of gameplay and narrative, which we'll touch on later, is painfully slow. As much as I've come to enjoy JRPGs, I've only played one that gripped me through its entire opening, and it's Persona 5. One gameplay narrative element I do like is the campfire system. Here you can use ingredients to cook restoration items, rest to restore all of your stats, and talk to your party. It's a nice inclusion to fit the mechanics into the world and enhance your link to your party. Overall, I do like the majority of elements of gameplay here, but the whole package feels less than the sum of its parts. The combat is mechanically great and engaging, but it doesn't evolve enough. The exploration fits the lack of waypoints perfectly and negates needing to grind because the game is balanced around the intended encounters, but it ultimately just feels too confined and linear. My ultimate wish here is that we actually see a grander scope sequel to Sea of Stars, one that has a bit more room to branch out and shake things up, because this is a great gameplay foundation that just feels constrained by limited scope. There is absolutely a lot to enjoy here though, and despite my criticisms, I do feel justified in giving the gameplay a 4 out of 5. Every frame here is a painting. Sea of Stars is just gorgeous. The crown jewel is obviously the pixel art style of the game. Environments are brought to life with an incredible attention to detail, and I was always excited to see where I'd go next. For outdoor areas, this excellent depth effect is also used to give the game a wonderfully wide scope. Everything is just so damn colourful too, and 1,000 tiny animations for flowers swaying to leaves rustling to wind lines. There's a calm energy about every environment that I just adored. Enemies share the same design and animation care. Everyone here has a wonderfully unique design, and their animations are a delight to watch. My only gripe here is that certain attack animations don't quite gel with the blocking mechanic due to the isometric perspective. Things will look like they're further away from you than they actually are, and it can make timing blockings a bit weird. I also adore the little weakness slot machine intro. Just beautiful. Party animations are solid, you move with great fluidity, attacks and abilities all have great sights and sounds, and characters have their own unique way of sitting around the fire. There's a lot of character in these visuals. The dialogue text boxes are also nicely stylized with great character portraits. The soundscape of the world is divine. Attention to detail here is on par with that of the visual style of the game, as in excellent. Everything from footsteps to enemies burrowing underground to birds flying away and water rushing sounds wonderful and only further envelops you into the world. The OST even changes dynamically when you change the time of day. Excellent inclusion. Unfortunately, the OST is the complete opposite of the rest of the sound design. At best, it is just fine, ultimately average. At worst, it is downright grating. The worst offender is the battle theme. I hated it, and if I never have to hear it again, it will be too soon. Having a very limited selection of battle themes in a JRPG is a big risk, because the player is going to hear them constantly. Only 2 games make this work in my opinion, and they make it work because they have some of the best music in general, not just gaming. Sea of Stars misses this mark, and the rest of the OST just felt super generic for the most part. There were a few nice tracks, but they were always pushed out of my mind by the more annoying ones, and the more annoying ones were more frequent. UI design is lightly themed, but most importantly, always clear to read. You will always be able to quickly see all of the information that you need to. Overall, the visual art direction here is stellar. I can easily recommend that you play this game just to look at it, and that even extends to the sound design, but the OST really let everything down for me, and on its own is enough to knock a point off, bringing the art direction to a 4 out of 5. I hate to say it, but the narrative here simply fell flat for me. It isn't terrible, but it is desperately boring. The slow opening doesn't help the story to start. You need a hook, something to grip the player and get them invested. A casino heist gone wrong, the player having the freedom to choose their opening. These have worked in the past. Sea of Stars does not have this hook. It tries, dropping you in a little ways along the story, then flashing back to have you catch up, but the writing and concept is so dry that it all just became white noise. The game simply failed to make me care, and if you fail to grab me during that opening, you're going to have an extremely hard time getting me reinvested. The main cast is likeable enough. I like Garl, but it very much felt like the cast were just observing the story. Things happen to them, but they don't quite react to those things. Something very important happens in the beginning of the game, but then nothing really comes from it. It just gets resolved once your adventure starts. The story very much feels like set dressing, rather than something to invest the player and push the game forward. I do like the campfire sections. These do a good job at giving the characters a little bit of extra depth, but it isn't expanded on enough to have a greater effect. As I stated a moment ago, the writing is also just very dry. A single line made me chuckle. That was the most emotion I felt. It's the one about 2 pirate costumes for the curious. I've always had a bone to pick with JRPG writing. Even my beloved Persona 5 has to tell you everything 3 times, but that story kept me invested by having excellent characters. Sea of Stars just struggles here. The writing is bland, the concept isn't really doing anything new, and the characters ultimately fell flat to me. Still, I didn't outright hate it, and that's what saves the narrative here from that dreaded 1 out of 5. Sea of Stars is getting a 2 out of 5 for an ultimately bland narrative. Sea of Stars is a solid content offering, backed by a small but impactful array of settings. We also experienced no bugs during our playtime. Content-wise, you're getting a full single-player world to explore, everything is broken up into hubs, and the overall package, whilst compact in scope for a JRPG, feels very complete. You also have 3 save slots to mess around with. Here is the array of settings. You can toggle vibration, and there are major language options. There are audio sliders for master, music, SFX, ambience, UI, and dialogue bloop volume. There is a brightness slider. Controls can be completely remapped. My only gripe is that certain things that should be settings are instead relics. Things like visual cues and even an easier difficulty setting. This isn't a major issue though, as the game does direct you here at the end of the tutorial. You won't miss it, but it feels like a weird split. Why isn't this just in the menu from the start of the game? I wasn't left wishing for any settings, however. There are no subtitle options, but subtitles are very clear with a nice readable font on a large text box. Conversations only progress with a button press, and this is extremely important as the game doesn't have any voice acting. The game also never asks for complicated button combinations. Everything from timing to interacting to attacks are one button press, so the game is nice and accessible at a base level. Some relics do act as accessibility settings, however, and once again, it feels weird to bury these as gameplay equipables rather than just in an accessibility settings menu. I don't think that this is a big enough issue to knock a point off, but it is something to be aware of if you need these settings. Overall, Sea of Stars is a great content offering, and I honestly wasn't left wanting more from the package nor the settings. Just be aware that some options are presented in a weird way. Still, the specs here are getting the full 5 out of 5 because the package is polished and nothing is really missing. It will take you around 20 to 25 hours to complete Sea of Stars. From a gameplay standpoint, I think this overstates its welcome as it doesn't really expand, but from a visual standpoint, it's worth every second. It's also on the shorter end of JRPG lengths, so in that vein, this is actually a pretty compact experience. If you're looking for JRPG elements, this is a pretty good bet if you don't have a lot of time. For what it's worth, the lack of random encounters and focused area design does help keep the game from wasting your time. Mine never felt wasted, but the repetitiveness did start to get to me. The big gameplay commitment issue here is that you only save when you reach one of these books, or get an autosave. This means that fitting Sea of Stars into your free time can be an issue because you don't know exactly when you'll be able to end your current session without losing progress. Sitting down with only 15 minutes to play can be a bit of a risk of wasting your time. Also, if you die, you go all the way back to your last save point, which can be frustrating. Thankfully, hard drive footprint is nice and small. Sea of Stars wanted 4.6GB on Xbox and 3.7GB on PlayStation 4 and 5. You've got no worries here if your internet speed is a little slow or your hard drive space is limited. For the most part, I'm pretty happy here, but that save issue and the gameplay overstaying its welcome a little is enough to knock a point off, bringing Sea of Stars to a 4 out of 5 on our commitment scale. Sea of Stars is worth your time, but that statement comes with a lot of buts. The gameplay is great on a mechanical level, but it doesn't really grow. The art direction is frankly excellent, with a ton of care and attention, but that same care was not given to the narrative. My recommendation is to absolutely give it a go, but once you feel like you've had your fill, sit down at a campfire and give it a rest for good.